Hi everybody, it's great to be back here again on Itamar. It's Friday, Parashat Vayigash. I'd like to get down to our Torah lesson. A very, very basic question of faith is the difficulty of understanding evil in the world. Why is there evil in the world? Why do people suffer in the world? Especially a lot of times we see the righteous suffer in the world. We don't understand why bad things happen. A classical work of the Torah, the Bible, is the book of Job. The book of Job, everyone's familiar with the story of Job. There's a fascinating work where, according to one opinion in the Talmud, it was written as a parable by Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses himself, to describe, to try to come up with an understanding of evil in the world. And the bottom line of the book of Job, the bottom line reality, is that we really, in a short time span of life, it's very, very difficult for us because we're just a clip of an ongoing historical movement, right, of history, and we're part of this chain, an unbreakable chain, and sometimes hard for us to, within a short time, to understand why these things are happening. And God comforts Moshe Rabbeinu, because I'm saying as the author of Eov, according to one of the opinions, but of course comforting Job. And at the end of the book we see that Eov, or Job in English, feels that comfort, and he understands more in reality, but that God reveals himself to him, understands a greater understanding of who he is, his place in the world, that we really don't have an answer. We as human beings cannot really understand totally why is there evil in the world, but we have to place our trust in the creator of the universe, Hashem, who created us. If we understand that everything is from him and everything comes from Hashem, we will be able to withstand every obstacle that comes our way. Of course, we always pray, God forbid, we shouldn't have obstacles come our way. We should have a very, very peaceful life without ups and downs. But this wasn't the case, of course, of Jacob and his sons. Yaakov Avinu, as we know, Yaakov went through so much trials and tribulations and ups and downs. And of course, Yosef, who was sold down to Egypt, and all that difficulty that is examples of the future of the house of Israel, the difficulties we've been through. And we can understand great historical difficulties that we've been through. We don't understand why sometimes. The Holocaust is the height of that, right? But we understand it's again a small frame of his history, and obviously there's the reasons that are beyond our grasp. But we have to try to remain steadfast in our faith to Hashem, and we will be able to overcome. As long as we cleave to Hashem, he'll give us the power to overcome. In this portion of Vayigash, I think there's a very, very strong example of sometimes things that we're able to see later on, how things work themselves out, and we see where the divine plan is very, very clear, or comes forward in this story. Of course, in our portion, and that we see so clearly that, obviously, when you think about it, the worst possible scenario of brothers selling a brother, I mean, that is so painful, and it's the greatest tragedy to think about, willing to sell their brother. And they come along and they sell Yosef down to Egypt. And Yosef goes through very, very difficult time, as we all know. But, of course, Hashem is now unfolding with that very, very hard event, a very, very, very catastrophe of selling a brother. But we see, at the other hand, which in our one hand looks like the most evil thing could be possibly done, which it is a terrible, evil thing. But we see we can say to ourselves, okay, why did it happen? How can it? What is Jacob asking himself? My goodness, his son Yosef, who's so much like him, he loves his son so much, his son, and he sees his garment and blood and that he made from the Tonat Pasim, and what's going on in his mind? Is he questioning God, God forbid? He just doesn't understand. Where's my son? How could this happen to me? He didn't break his faith, of course. But we see the divine plan in the picture, why Jacob was mourning and felt the loss of his son. He was slowly in Egypt like a seed germinating, and eventually to reach to become a beautiful tree where he's now in leadership, and he's able to support the brothers and take care of them and prepare and help the world, of course, in a terrible famine period. So everything that Jacob thought it was over, and looking at this terrible incident, he didn't know, of course, his brother sold him, but we all know the facts that he was sold, which looked like a terrible, evil thing, which it was. But in reality, behind the scenes, why did it happen? If we never saw the rest of the picture, we wouldn't have known. But the fact that now we can look back, look up at a much broader spectrum of the Bible, and we know what happens. We know how Joseph becomes a viceroy, and how he's helping everyone. He brings them down, and he's supporting them. And that great, beautiful personality who Joseph is, and who accepts, of course, the difficulty that he went through, and it says it was all for the best. This is exactly what the divine plan was. So Hashem is revealing to us. Here we are able to see in a short time span the fulfillment of why this had to happen for, how this took place, this bad event. But it ended up in a very big blessing for the house of Israel, for the entire world, that Joseph was in the position that he was in. We have a Jewish law that says, Chayav Adam levarech al hara'ah ke'ena tova. A person must bless over evil as he blessed over good. What do you mean blessing over evil? Means, God forbid, if someone has a terrible tragedy, he's forced to bless. He has to bless a blessing over that. And we all are familiar with that as in Jewish mourning. And that's the hardest thing in the world, a person to be able to make a blessing over a terrible, terrible incident that takes place, a loss of a loved one that he lost. So that is so painful. In reality, any very bad catastrophe, we make a blessing to realize that Hashem is the true judge, and He is obviously He knows what He's doing in the world. We as human beings cannot understand it. Of course, it doesn't make it easier for us on one end to understand, because we will never grasp it. But we can. The one thing that can comfort us is knowing that Hashem is the true judge, and everything He does, everything He chooses in this world, all the things that He makes, and all the happenings that go on in the world, that He's behind the scenes. This is for the best, as we say in Hebrew, Gamzu L'Tova. This is always for the best, right? This is what we're familiar with. The story of Rabbi Akiva, every saying Gamzu L'Tova, or Ish Nachum Ish Gamzu. We're all familiar with that expression, that a person being able to relate to what happens in the world, it's for the best. It's a very, very hard level to be on when you're going through that terrible tragedy. God forbid, this week it was a terrible tragedy in Israel, in a car accident, and 3 children were killed. Well, 2 children, one, the mother pregnant, lost a child, and father's in critical condition, the mother's in critical condition in Samaria. Terrible, terrible accident, and it's hard, it's impossible to grasp the pain of such a terrible thing, and why we don't understand. We can't understand these things, but we just know the only way, once it happens, is try to comfort those who have gone through a terrible tragedy by showing them, it's almost impossible to do it, but somehow just allowing us to realize that we must trust in Hashem. The only way to really go through such a terrible thing is the trust in Hashem. The endless trust in Hashem will give us the power to overcome these things. And that is what was holding Jacob together when he was, for so many years, didn't know what happened to Joseph. And all of a sudden, think about his heart opening up to the reality, his son's alive, and as they meet in this week's portion. Fascinating account of the Torah, how they meet. And of course, this has to do with all things. When all of a sudden, someone thinking, it's mind-boggling. When people, when you have this kind of pre-notion, you think something is the way it is, and all of a sudden it turns around totally, and then you realize, my goodness, and you have such a happy awakening when there's a happy ending to the story. So that's what, of course, Jacob went through, and Hashem is telling us this in the story. And Joseph, that's his function, to teach us this lesson of realizing that at the end, things are for the best. They will work themselves out. We must understand, of course, it's much easier to say it when things really do work themselves out. We see that in our lives. The hardest thing to contend with is when we don't see that happy ending, and we only have to face with the terrible tragedy, as we've seen in our history as the Jewish people, so many difficult tragedies. But at the end of the day, that is what the lesson the Torah is trying to teach us here, because that is The hardest thing we have as a human being is to cope with tragedy. That is the most difficult thing. And not to understand, why a lot of times we see the evil lifting their heads up and the righteous suffering so much in this world. But that is really what Joseph is showing us, and Joseph is teaching us, that we must rely on Hashem and have that faith in God, that strong faith, and that will keep us going. That will allow us to persevere in any situation. It is it's easy to see this. We look at the portion and read about it intellectually, we can understand it without intellect, but of course it's very, very hard to practice. This is something that if you want to apply this to your life, the person has to really work greatly on that to become part of his heart, that he literally understands his life with all the ups and downs, because there's no one who has life that is ups and not downs. Everyone has their ups and has their downs, and they have to realize that with this faith in Hashem, there is nothing that will be able to bring us to depression, God forbid, bring us into despair. We will always have the feeling of what Rabbi Nachman says, mitzvah gedolah. It's a great mitzvah, liyot b'simchat hamid, to always be happy, to always have that enthusiasm, that faith, that encouragement, that Hashem is with us, that Hashem is walking with us, even if we don't understand His ways. But Hashem is walking with us all the time, and that really will give us the faith and the power to overcome all our obstacles. Shabbat Shalom, Besorot Tovot. Let us, as we face these difficult period here in Israel and in the world, we're threatened by Iran, the COVID going rampant in the world, and all these difficult changes that are going on in the world. We're in a difficult period. But we have to rely on the Creator of the universe, Hashem Yitbarach. God is walking with us, and we put our trust in Hashem. We will persevere. Shabbat Shalom, B'Sorot Tovot.